Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Maria Jose Araya, and I'm the Learner Engagement Manager here at the AAMC. I'm joined today by three medical school professionals, Jessica Kontong, Kate Fukawa-Connolly, and Seth Ramus. Jessica has been working in higher education for the past 15 years and has worked at large institutions including UC San Diego, UC Berkeley, and San Francisco State University. Currently, she is the Associate Director for HealthBeat, the centralized pre-health advising center at UC San Diego's Career Center. She teaches a medical school prep 101 class to help students strategically develop their timeline and become competitive applicants to medical school or other health profession schools. Kate Fukawa-Connolly is the Director of Health Professions Advising at Princeton University. She began her health professions advising career at the University of Maryland in Baltimore County in 2003. She worked at Brandeis University and the University of New Hampshire before she joined the Health Professions Advising team at Princeton in 2012. In 2015, she was appointed as the Director of Communications for the National Association of Advisors for the Health Professions, and through this volunteer role, she creates resources and facilitates communication for health advisors and students. Seth has been advising pre-health students full-time since 2011. Before that, he taught and conducted research into the neurobiology of learning and memory as a faculty member at Bowdoin and MIT, and taught basic medical neurology and neuroanatomy at the UCSD School of Medicine. As both Director of Health Professions Advising and Director of Bowdoin's Beckman Scholars Program, Seth works with pre-health and science students to explore and prepare for careers in health and science careers. In 2017, he was elected to the Executive Committee of the Northeast Association of Advisors for the Health Professions. That being said, I'm happy to have you all here. Thank you all so much, and I'm turning it over to you.
Thanks, Maria, for that introduction. Hi, everyone. It's nice to virtually see you all. I'm Kate. As you heard from those introductions, we are three different advisors with different backgrounds and working on different campuses, but I think you'll find we have a lot in common in how we think about preparing students to apply and ultimately to become doctors, which includes a lot of conversations about time between graduation from undergrad and matriculation into medical school, which is what we'll talk about today. Just to give you a broad overview, we know that a lot of you might be at very different stages in your pre-health, pre-med lives, so we're going to cover some pretty broad information in this talk, but we will try to leave a lot of time for questions. We also will have a list of resources at the end of this slide, and there's an advisor booth in the virtual fair, so if you have specific questions based on your context, we'll be staffing that booth. Seth and I and Jessica will be there. There are a bunch of other advisors there, so we're there kind of to answer those individual contextual questions even beyond this hour. So this is who we are. You can also see our little headshots, but just to give you a little bit of context on my current institution, I have about 5,200 undergrads overall, about 1,000 or so who are thinking pre-med or pre-health. We have about 130 applicants to medical school per year, and about 80% of those students are taking time between undergrad and medical school.
And for me, this is Jessica. At UC San Diego, we have around 30,000 plus undergraduates. We guesstimate there's around 10,000 pre-health and pre-med students on our campus, and about 500 plus applicants per year. In terms of those who take a gap year, again, I'm not sure I don't have that information, but it's around 50% or higher. I know that the School of Medicine at UC San Diego, that's even higher. I'd say 85% of those who are accepted into the School of Medicine have taken at least one gap year.
And I'm Seth Ramus, and I'm from Bowdoin College, which is a small liberal arts college in southern Maine. And so we have about 1,800 students in residence, and about 30 to 50 of our students apply to medical school each year. And for us, about 86% of our students take at least 1 year. 83% of students take at least 2 years before entering medical school.
Cool. So to start with, we're going to go super basic information. You will find that this idea of a gap year or a glide year or a bridge year, an opportunity year, different advisors have different terminology for this time. Gap year is probably the most common. It's kind of useful terminology because a lot of pre-med applicants do use the time to fill some gaps in their application portfolio with classes or with experience. But whatever term works for you, totally reasonable, or whatever term is used on your campus, we're all basically referring to the time that students take between college and medical school. I personally have always liked the term glide year because I think it feels less abrupt than gap. When I hear gap, I think of like the Grand Canyon as this big hole that you could fall into, this big gap within the world, which to me isn't a particularly positive image. Whereas when I think of glide, I think more about traveling gracefully between one place and the next. I actually picture a hang glider in my mind, hence your slide, because I think the glide year also gives you a brief pause from an education where you have more time to just kind of think broadly, think big picture, bird's eye view of where you've been and where you're heading. So that's why I like glide year personally, and that's why this presentation was called what it is. This slide is really meant to give you a sense of the diversity of timelines that my applicants tend to take on their way to medical school. We have a small percentage every year who are accepted through sophomore early assurance programs, about 13% who apply at the end of the junior year to go directly into medical school after graduation, another 25% who apply at the end of senior year to take one glide year, and then more than half have taken multiple glide years. Some who are pre-med and kind of planning on medicine the whole time, some who came to it a little bit later as career changers, and we'll talk a little bit more about what people do at that time as the slides go on. And just to prove to you that they didn't choose us specifically because we have a lot of students at our 3 institutions taking this glide time, this is national data from the AAMC survey that they administer every year to students who are starting medical school. So you can find this online, you have the link there. It shows that in the most recent application cycle, about 35% of matriculants went directly into medical school, 44% took 1 to 2 years, and about 21% took 3 or more years. So the number of applicants matriculating right after undergrad has decreased slightly over the past 3 application cycles.
So if I can give you guys one piece of advice, that piece of advice is to submit an application to apply when you are ready to apply to medical school. In other words, when you are ready to put forth an application that demonstrates your academic preparation, your understanding of medicine, and what it means to be a doctor, and understanding your own motivations for why you want to go to medical school. I know you're anxious to get there, but a failed application is really hard. The application process is long, it's expensive, and it's emotionally taxing. And as I'll explain later, it can actually add some more time to your application if you do have a failed application. So what can you gain by this extra time? Well, you can use that time to be more ready. And by more ready, I mean to put forth a more compelling application. And for many of my students who aren't absolutely sure that medicine is the path for them, or who are trying to decide between medicine in a clinical sense and medicine in a physician-scientist sense, this additional time can help them to really understand who they are and who they want to be. It can give you time to be more mature. Many of our students don't have real life experience, what it's like to get insurance or talk to a landlord about problems with your house. So this real life experience you can gain during the time between college and medical school. And you won't have time to learn how to build healthy habits, how to build exercise into an extraordinarily busy and regimented schedule. And what you'll find is that your schedule is very different and expectations are very different when you're in the real working world or medical school world than when you were in college. You can use this time to fight burnout. It's a time to re-energize, maybe fulfill a life dream, walking the Pacific Crest Trail or the Appalachian Trail or any number of things that people want to do. Maybe it's play a professional sport or compete in the Olympics or any number of things. but it's a time to take care of distractions, family, or other distractions, and to make some money. As I said, it can cost quite a bit of money to apply to medical school, and so having some cash in your pocket can be very helpful. And it's also a time to align your preparation with your goals. You need to demonstrate through your experiences what you want to do with your life. And so it's great that you want to be a doctor, but you have to think about whether or not you have completely demonstrated your understanding of what that means when you're applying. Oops. So when I'm talking about taking a gap year with a student, I encourage my students to evaluate their competencies. And these are the competencies that you can find on the AAMC website. They are important not only in evaluating your candidacy, but the reason that they're important, of course, is because this is what medical schools will be evaluating you on. So you need to think about what your strengths and weaknesses are and whether or not you're actually ready to apply. And these include, at the top, the academic competencies, and those are things like critical thinking and quantitative reasoning, but they're also your ability to handle large amounts of very complicated biological, chemical, and physical materials. There are also all kinds of inter- and intrapersonal competencies. These are the competencies that are going to make you a good and ethical doctor and give you the skill and demonstrate the skills that you need to create strong relationships with your patients. So when a student is looking at these competencies and thinking about whether or not they have something to describe if they were asked about these competencies, they want to think about if there's some serious weaknesses or gaps that an additional time or a gap year between college and matriculation in medical school could actually give them the opportunity to work on and strengthen these competencies. Working on weaknesses takes time. And medical schools are not impressed by something that you plan to do. Let's take the example of a student who looks at their competencies and says, oh, I haven't spent a lot of time in a clinic, and maybe I need to get some additional clinical experience. If that student were to apply in June and then to start a clinical experience in July, in essence what they're doing in their application is saying to the medical schools, I know I want to be a doctor because of these great experiences that I'm going to have in the future. And that's not very compelling. So you want to make sure that when you are making your plan, that you are planning enough time to actually demonstrate those competencies. And in this conversation, it's not uncommon for a student to say to me, you know, what if I were to just apply just in case this year and see what happens? And the answer, as I said before, is that sometimes that can actually add additional time to your application. Let's take that student with the weakness in the clinical competency and say that they were going to apply this year, this coming June. After a year of application, they've discovered that, in fact, they were not accepted. So this is a year from June that they're really starting to come to grips with the fact that they're not going to be going to medical school. And in fact, maybe they're on a wait list and they may not have this definitive answer until the following August. That student still needs now to regroup and address those weaknesses. Which means not applying immediately in June. I like to say to my students, if you apply in the following June, you are applying with an application that says, look, I'm much stronger an applicant than I am right now. So the student needs to regroup and address those weaknesses, and then would reapply the following summer to be accepted in the fall of 2023. A student who instead chose to directly address those weaknesses before applying would then apply in 2021 instead of 2020 and could be accepted in 2022. And that's to you, Jessica.
Thanks, Seth. So how does it work? So by the time of the application, regardless of what year it is and whether you take a gap year or not, you'll need to show evidence of your academic readiness. Basically, you'll need to have taken all of the prerequisite coursework. So that's usually a 2.5 to 3 year sequence of biology, chemistry, physics, and math. And these are courses that build off one another, and you'll need to take the MCAT and also just prepare you in general for med school. Also, by the time you apply, you will need to analyze your metrics and make sure they're aligned with the schools you're interested in. So by the time you apply, you'll be looking at a database called the MSAR, which is the Medical School Admissions Requirements Database. That captures all the schools in the U.S., and you can compare your metrics and align them with the school's metrics. Another thing that you have to consider by the time of application, you should have a certain amount of activities and experiences that will make you competitive. So this could be volunteer experience, direct interaction with patients, service, working with disadvantaged communities, leadership, research, whatever helps to build a competitive application. And just so you know, when you go to the AMCAS application, there's a section, it's the work and activities experience section, where you can fill up to 15 work and activities. So I always ask my students, do you have enough experiences? Is there enough depth and breadth of experiences to make you competitive for this particular cycle? Also, at the time of application, you will need letters of evaluation. Typically, you'll need 4 to 6. I always tell my students, get 4 to 6, hope for 3 or 4. There's always something that happens with letters. They don't always come through. There might be an emergency, so you want to get enough letters so you can have them when you apply. So typically it would be 2 science letters, 1 non-science. That's a nice general rule to follow. If you do extensive research, we'd recommend your PI and then a supervisor or boss or mentor or someone else that can speak to your qualifications. Also, you'll have to write a personalized evidence-based why medicine answer to the personal comments essay, which is basically the personal statement. Why are you pursuing medicine versus another health profession or something else? This is important to have a compelling story and really to understand what is my motivation for pursuing medicine. Why am I compelled to do this versus another health profession? And then, as Seth mentioned, you need to be ready to apply in June. It's rolling admissions, which means they're looking at individuals' applications as soon as they come in. So the minute they come in, if they like you, they're going to send you a secondary, maybe an interview. So you really want to be in front of the line. You want to give yourself every opportunity to be ahead and take advantage of that so you can have the best chance of getting that interview. So this next slide is really just to compare to glide or not to glide and how to make that decision to do that. So some of the factors to consider when taking a glide year or not taking a glide year is the first one is just general academic progress and prereqs. If you don't take a glide year, you will be applying June of your junior year, which means you only have 3 years and 2 summers on your application. So versus, let's say you decide to take a glide year, you're going to apply June of your senior year or when you graduate. That gives you a full 4 years of academic progress of time on your application. This is really helpful because it can show your academic progress. It could show you're trending upwards. Schools can see that you did well in upper division coursework, and especially if you're a non-science or non-bio major, this is especially important to see that 4th year. Also, I'll kind of talk about the next 2 points together. If you don't take a glide year, another thing to consider to do it is, will I have enough of those experiences that I mentioned earlier? Will I have enough clinical and service and research and leadership? Obviously, if you don't take a gap year, you only have those 3 years to get all of those experiences in addition to taking all your coursework, the prereqs. It's a lot to do in a short amount of time. So with the extra year, if you applied at the end of your senior year, you have more time to develop that personal and professional, gain those experiences. And similarly, if you don't take the glide year, you don't have the opportunity to get the letters from your junior summer or senior year, whereas oftentimes you'll get better letters, stronger letters, if you continue to do the experiences through your senior year, because maybe you'll be in a leadership position, or maybe you'll have done more extensive research by then. So you'll have that opportunity to get that stronger letter, which is very important. Also, another thing to consider before you decide to glide or not to glide is about when you're going to take the MCAT. So if you're not gliding, you can't take the MCAT no later than May of your junior year, which honestly I wouldn't even recommend that, because May of your junior year and applying June of your junior year is very stressful to prepare for the MCAT on top of taking a full load of courses, on top of doing research and leadership and service and clinical and all of that. And it's just a long, complex process to even apply. So I don't recommend that to my students, but that's just another thing to consider when deciding if you want to glide or not to glide. With the glide year, you can actually have more breathing room. You can use the summer of your junior year after all your prereqs are done to really study, devote, kind of live, breathe, and eat the MCAT, and then really devote all your time to taking your 5 to 10 full-length practice exams. And it's an 8-hour exam, so you really need to find where are you going to find 10 days where you can take an 8-hour exam. It's usually going to be the summer. So from there, I recommend taking it either in late August or September of your senior year, and then applying June of your senior year right after graduation. And then finally, I'll just say that if you don't glide, just know that you will actually be interviewing during your last year or your senior year or an academic year. And as I mentioned earlier, you'll be taking a lot of coursework, you'll be flying to interviews and having to deal with potentially having a midterm or a final and that interfering. It's just another layer of stress I tell my students they don't need. So versus if you take that one glide year, you actually can interview during your glide year. So if you're just taking one glide year, I see that really as your interview year. That's when you're going on your interviews from September to February. And it's just also another opportunity to diversify your experience.
I'm just going to amplify what Jessica just said and say that students very often focus on when they want to enter medical school and then start working backward. Okay, if I want to enter medical school right after I graduate, then this is when I need to take the MCAT, and this is when I need to take my physics sequence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's much better to actually think about when you have the time to do the things that you need to do. And the MCAT is a great example of that. It may be that you need to take the MCAT in order to apply in June, or excuse me, need to take the MCAT in May to apply in June. But if you don't have time to take the MCAT in May, then you're setting yourself up for failure. And so I encourage my students to think forward. When do you have time to study for and take the MCAT? And that dictates when you take the MCAT. And then that can dictate when you're ready to apply to medical school. So what can you do if you decide to take additional time between graduation and matriculation, that glide year? And the answer is that there is no one answer for all students, that there is no perfect path to medical school. There is no one path for postgraduate to medical school. It is really about you and assessing where you are. You can use this time to focus on your interests and explore those interests. It's really common for a student not to know, for instance, whether or not they want to be a more clinical or research-oriented physician as a junior in high school or in college. And so they need that additional time to explore those interests and figure out where they belong so that they can choose a school that is more research or more clinically oriented. You can use that additional time to reinforce your strengths. Maybe getting deeper research experience, for example. or to address an area of weakness. If you know that you have your academics aren't where you want them to be, then you might spend this additional time in a post-baccalaureate program or taking additional courses to directly address those weaknesses. You could build a complementary skill set. In other words, let's say your interest is in social justice and you want to work in Spanish-speaking communities, and you have good kitchen table Spanish, but you want to learn medical Spanish. And so you spend a year working in a free clinic in Los Angeles, working in Spanish-speaking communities in order to build those strengths. Or maybe it's a time that you need to earn money in order to not have to put all of the application and interviews on a credit card at 20% interest, which is going to really be a nightmare when you get out of medical school. And the answer is that students do all of these things. They spend this time working at other careers, in research, improving their finances. And those of you who are really detail-oriented will notice that this adds up to more than 100%. And that's because students are not just picking one thing to concentrate on in their glide years. They're actually spending their time working on a number of things. Now we want to sort of give you some examples of some of the things that our students have done in these glide years, and give you some examples that sort of illustrate some of the reasons why students might choose to do this. So I had a student a few years back who grew up in a very horsey family. She spent a lot of time in high school riding in a summer camp that was an equestrian summer camp, and eventually worked herself up to a counselor. And this was a very important part of her high school years. After her sophomore year in college, she returned to the camp, and instead of just returning as a camp counselor, she apprenticed with a therapeutic riding instructor at the camp and started working with kids who had developmental disorders and adolescents who had survived trauma. And she really sort of fell in love with this patient population. And this love of working with those students had started to become the seed of an interest in a career in medicine. She continued through college to spend time working on her writing, her therapeutic writing, and after college, she went and enrolled in a program that allowed her to become a certified therapeutic writing instructor. She then started working for a company that used therapeutic writing and led trips in Central and South America with students with disabled children and students with physical handicaps. And this was really an important part of her interest in medicine, and she of course is now in medical school after taking 3 years between graduation and medical school to work on something that was very interesting to her. I had another student who was, shall we say, more interested in football and playing football in college than on his academics. And so when he graduated, his academic record was not particularly spectacular. He then went in after graduation and got a job working at Dana-Farber, doing basic science cancer research. In this position, he really sort of figured out that what he wanted to do was to become a physician scientist. And his grades were so not spectacular that he could not directly apply to a post-baccalaureate program. His grades were not high enough. And so he started taking classes 1 or 2 at a time while he was working, in research, and eventually built up a portfolio that allowed him to apply for and be accepted in a post-baccalaureate program. And of course, he was very successful in that post-baccalaureate. It was a master's level program that included both coursework and a thesis. And he eventually applied to and is currently enrolled in an MD PhD program. Jessica?
So for my examples, they were more general. Most of my students are taking a gap year, and they're doing things like they might do what we have at UCSC, which is the BSMS program. It's basically a research year where they do a master's and continue their research from undergraduate. It's very popular to do. Also, some students have certifications as an EMT, and they might have gotten certifications their sophomore year summer, and so now they're starting to use that and to work and to save money for med school. Teach for America is popular, Fulbright as well. Some may or may not do the Peace Corps. And then another thing that I think is really popular for my students to do is scribing. So a lot of the students have either their certificate or get to scribe with a physician that they got to know over the years. Kate?
Yeah, so I think my students, similar lines, are doing all of these same kinds of things. A lot of times it's a passion that they've been building from high school through college that they then want to extend a little bit beyond college. Sometimes they just discover a new interest in college, and maybe they connect with a research mentor in another country and put together that Fulbright proposal and have a full year of funded experience to do research on what they really love, whether it's medical or not. I think it's a really great opportunity to show your creativity, your initiative, your vision for yourself as a professional to do one of these fellowship programs. And there are a number of them. Fulbright just happens to be one that I talk about a lot. And we have on my website, hpa.princeton.edu, I have a Google spreadsheet that has a couple hundred at least, going back to at least 5 years of alums of kind of how they spent their glide time. So you are welcome. It's an open document. You can go poke around and see the places that they were, the timelines that they took. It's not super formal. It really is just a Google spreadsheet, but you're welcome to go poke around in there. And then plenty of my students, probably 30% or so, do either post-bac coursework, either a la carte at a university or college near where they're working and just taking classes on the side, or through a formal post-bac program. So we also wanted to put a shout out to the AAMC post-bac program search engine, which is a great resource to locate post-bac options in the academic realm. If you haven't seen these yet, these are some more real-life examples. The AAMC's Anatomy of an Applicant goes into depth sharing med students' backgrounds and personal journeys. Some of these med students went directly to med school from undergrad. Some took 1 or 2 or more years. Some did a special master's program to gain more experience. Some did research or service or a combination. I think that what is useful about these especially is that they present the stories with a focus on those AAMC core competencies that Seth mentioned. So you can really see how real life people who are in medical school demonstrated the competencies through their work in undergrad and in their glide years. They also include feedback from admissions officers who talk about why they chose these students for their program. So you can kind of see how those experiences that they did showed their fit for a specific medical school program. So I think it's a really nice opportunity to kind of look at other people's stories to be able to reflect on your own.
So where to look for opportunities. So before you start looking for opportunities, I always suggest to my students, you should meet with your pre-health advisor to identify any potential gaps in your application or any missing pieces, or even just talking to an advisor about ways to strengthen your application. So once you determine those, then you can decide if you need more clinical, more service, more leadership or research. And this could help you do a more targeted search for opportunities. So you can talk to people like your internship supervisors, your thesis advisor, if you're doing research or PI. Tap into your personal network. As I mentioned, most schools should have some sort of pre-health advisor and also career advising office. As Kate mentioned, the AAMC post-bac, going ahead and taking a look at that. If that's where there's a gap or a weakness, you need to improve your GPA. And then also just human resources websites, Indeed.com, things like that.
So when you go and talk with your pre-health advisor, you want to be ready to ask questions. You want to also sort of sit down and think about what your goals are. You know, where do you want to go to medical school? Maybe it's how competitive a medical school you're interested in going to, or whether it's a certain kind of medical school, maybe one that is focused on primary care or one that is focused on research, because these kinds of goals are going to be the foundation of the conversation you have with your advisor. You should be prepared to ask them, do you think my candidacy is strong enough to reach this goal? Because you have to understand that getting research experience may not be what you need to do if you want to go to a medical school that is focused on social justice and you're saying that you want to work in underserved communities. You might want to get that kind of experience that makes you a strong candidate to work in underserved communities. You want to sort of focus your questions on what you are going to do during your remaining college years and beyond to continue to work on and explore those goals and the weaknesses or strengths that you have identified in your application. And you also need to be ready to answer a lot of questions. And I tell my students this all the time. I am not a fan of the word should, so don't ask me what you should be doing. I want to know what you want to be doing. And that's because this is going to help to create a theme about your path to medical school. You want that theme to reflect who you are and who you want to be. In other words, it doesn't help your application if you are developing research skills and saying that you want to work in primary care and underserved communities. Likewise, volunteering in hospice may not be the thing that you need if you want to get into an MD, PhD program. So you really want to think about what is important and interesting to you. We do recognize that not all of you have access to advisors. The first thing that you need to do, whether you are currently out of school or have graduated already, is to identify those advisors at your institution and to see if you have access to them. If you don't, the NAAHP, the National Association of Advisors for the Health Professions, has a link that you can go and fill out a form and request access to an advisor. Also, there are advisors available at this fair, and Kate, who is an incredible multitasker, may in fact already be in the chat room while we are giving this talk. But there are advisors available right now in order to speak with you about your individual questions.
Okay, so we're going to wrap this up now. So other next steps before moving forward is really start thinking about who you want to connect with to help you on this journey. Work with your advising resources, the Career Center, fellowship advisor, financial aid, talk with peers, talk to your family. Also connect with alumni. You can check in with your alumni office or connect with them on LinkedIn. Alumni typically like to help other alumni. And, you know, whatever you decide to do, just know, especially if you're planning for the summer and taking a gap year, really know that you need a good 3 to 6 months in advance to plan and to apply and to get all your application materials together. Also, talk to mentors. And then, as Kate mentioned, the Anatomy of an Applicant section is really great for reading about other people's journeys and giving you an idea of what they did during their gap years and how they helped build a competitive application. So now we're going to move on to questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jessica, Kate, and Seth. We're going to move on to Q&A as we have a little bit less than 20 minutes to go. So the first question is from Dana, and that is, do medical schools look poorly on post-baccalaureate programs when looking at acceptance?
I can take that. The answer is no. They don't look at that poorly. It is not always the case that a student knows that they want to be a physician before going on to when they're in college. And so there are whole post-baccalaureate programs that are designed to get students through who are coming to this decision to enter medical school after college through their pre-medical requirements, even in a single year. There are also many students who are applying to post-baccalaureates and going through post-baccalaureates because they weren't academically ready at the end of college, and they need an opportunity to continue to grow and an opportunity to show off their academic chops. And so a large proportion of students entering medical school have gone through some sort of a post-baccalaureate program. It is not being in a post-baccalaureate that will make you a competitive applicant. It's showing that you have the academic competencies through that post-baccalaureate that will get you into medical school.
Yeah, so I often advise students not to rush into a post-bac just because they know what's a possible next step. I think it's really important that you do that soul searching, that you know you have your academic strategies in place, that you know your motivation is going to pull you through and help you make the sacrifices that maybe you couldn't make during undergrad. Because once you do the post-bac, it's harder to start doing a post-bac for your post-bac if it doesn't go well. So it's definitely a good conversation to have with an advisor about timelines and strategies and choosing the right post-bac program for you based on the kind of wisdom that you've gained through your undergrad experience.
Thank you. So we have a question from Sierra that says, I'm currently not working as I'm focusing solely on studying for the MCAT. Since I'm primarily studying for the MCAT, I am also not doing much volunteering. Should I be concerned with building more experience and do more volunteering/working, or is it okay to just focus on studying so I get a good score on the MCAT?
I can take that one. I think it depends on what you've done already. That's usually what I would say. I definitely always recommend, if possible, really just living and breathing the MCAT for those 12 weeks or 300 hours or whatever you're going to do to spend preparing. It's really rigorous and you can burn out quickly, and you really need to focus on that. I always tell students it's great you have the opportunity to take the MCAT again, but you really just want to be ready. Take it when you're ready, and that's why you need to take a number of full-length practice exams. So if possible, that's what I would recommend. And again, that might also mean maybe you need a gap year or two because you need more time to gain those experiences if you haven't done anything yet.
I would give a slightly different answer, which is that I think having something in there to keep you motivated, whether that is your job or even if it's just volunteering once a week while you're preparing for the MCAT, can help you keep some perspective on why you're doing this. Studying for the MCAT is a lot of hard work, but it's just one small piece in this whole path to medical school. And so having some perspective is a good thing. I think having some distraction is a good thing, and even if that slows down your preparation for the MCAT, I think that students can be very successful by finding a little bit more balance. But ultimately, it comes down to what works best for you.
Yeah, I think one life hack that I kind of recommend to my students as you're preparing for your MCAT is go find an under-resourced public school in your area that's looking for someone who wants to volunteer to do some SAT math or some AP biology tutoring, because then you're doing your service, but you're also working on your science concepts at the same time. So you're kind of multitasking. You're still studying MCAT by teaching other people science, and you're showing that commitment to the community.
Thank you all. We have a question from Mona that says, is it frowned upon to take more than one gap year? How about 3 gap years?
No, not at all. I think we'd probably all agree that it's really about when you're ready to do it, when you have enough collective experience of your clinical volunteering, patient contact, research, leadership, all of those things that build a strong application. I have students who are career changers and had different careers and I knew someone that went to med school at 30 and then is now a surgeon. So I don't think years matter as much as how ready you are. Overall readiness with not just experiences, but also metrics and grades and things like that.
I would completely agree, and I would add that 83% of my students have taken at least 2 years between graduation and matriculation. It is about being ready and about applying when you can put together a strong application. And in fact, I think that medical schools value real life experience. They're looking for students who are going to be making life and death decisions. And have you had the opportunity to gain enough wisdom in your life to be able to make those kinds of life and death decisions? So I think that it is definitely not a disadvantage to take time, and that until we start getting out to 10 years or so, when schools start asking you to retake your prerequisite courses, I don't think that there's much difference there. And in fact, I have worked with recently with a student from my class of 1987 who has had a long and storied career in science and is considering going back to medical school now.
Wonderful. We'll move on to a question from Parse that says, are there any specific experiences that medical schools value more than others during the glide year?
Yeah, so I think that this gets back again to those themes and narratives that Seth was mentioning. They're really looking to understand how the pieces of your life fit together in the context of being in service to people who are suffering. So for some people, that could be that I really am interested in having that clinical component to better understand how to drive my research forward. For some people, that's I want to go back to my home community where I know that it's an underserved community and there wasn't good access to medical care and take care of my home population. And what you do during that time is really going to you want what you're doing during that time to resonate with the story that you're trying to tell. And it doesn't mean your job has to be directly connected to the story you're telling, but if your narrative was all about kind of caring for folks at home and you were working very far from home in finance, like that wouldn't necessarily show that direct correlation. So it might make sense to kind of think about other things you could do outside of your job, which is making you the money that you're going to need to pay for your applications, to also be continuing to feed that narrative and that thing that is driving you toward medicine. The one thing they don't want you to do is like sit on your couch and play Xbox all day. That does not impress anyone. But as long as you can talk about like being a productive member of society and building skills and competencies that are going to translate to your future as a physician, you're good.
Thank you. How do medical schools view an applicant who did not take a gap year versus one that did take a gap year?
I can get this one. I think
Sure.
it again comes back to readiness, like we've all been saying. If you are that student, and I've had students that are so ready, it's very rare. It's more the exception than the rule. But if maybe they started out taking OChem freshman year and they just progressed through their coursework really quickly, and they have the amount of experience with leadership, service, research, clinical, all of that, in addition to really being mature and reflecting on their experiences and reflecting on knowing really why they're doing this, why they're pursuing this, not just being smart. And so I think, again, if you happen to be ready and you don't need a gap year, I have students who are graduating early and they have that extra year, so they're sort of, they're just wanting to go right in because they're ready. And I think it really depends on you and how much experience you've gained and if you feel that you're ready to take the next step. The other thing, too, is, if that gives you enough time to get letters of recommendation. At my school in particular, since we have 30,000 undergrads, it's very challenging to get letters here. So it's one of the reasons why students are taking gap years, because they can't, it takes them much more time to get to know a professor in a class of 500. So it could take that extra year or that extra effort to really get to know someone to have a strong application. So again, I would just bring it back to overall readiness if you have done everything you need to do within those 3 years.
And I would add that you can sort of sit down yourself with those competencies and do a really honest evaluation. And if you bring that evaluation in with you and have a conversation with your advisor, they're going to be able to help you think through whether or not you're actually ready. It's about applying when you're ready, not when you think you should be ready.
Thank you so much. We have a question from Cameron that says, if the main goal of my glide year is to make money to help pay for my application and living expenses, does it matter if my job is medically related? Would it be looked down upon to hold a higher paying job that is unrelated to medicine?
I'll take that. I think that the answer is that all things considered, if you're telling them a medical school that you're really anxious to get into medicine, having something that's more related to medicine than, say, real estate is probably a good idea, but that there is an understanding that you need to do things to make some money if you don't happen to have that money going into the application process, in which case I would strongly recommend that you keep one sort of foot in medicine. So continuing to do some volunteer work and some medical exploration kind of work that allows you to say, in an interview, if somebody said, why did you take that consulting job? You can say, well, I wanted to make sure that I didn't go into medical school with any debt. And so I worked in consulting, but I really, really want to be a doctor, and so I volunteered in the emergency room at my local hospital and worked at the food kitchen, and I'm passionate about medicine because, and you can start talking about your experiences in medicine.
Wonderful, thank you. Rachel is asking, when trying to improve GPA with all pre-med classes already complete, how can you identify if a post-bac/SMP program is the right choice versus taking a la carte courses after graduation?
I can take that.
Go ahead.
It's often a conversation about time and treasure. So a formal program, a formal post-baccalaureate, whether it is an undergraduate level or a special master's program, will cost money. That money generally gives you more direct access to courses. You tend to do them full time, and so it is faster. Putting together courses on your own can be a challenge if you don't have any advising. And if you're putting them together on your own, you often don't have an advisor through whatever school or extension program you're taking the courses. But if you have an advisor at your undergraduate institution that's willing to work with you, you can often put these kinds of self-done or do-it-yourself post-baccalaureates together. Usually students who are doing this are taking a course or two at a time while they are working, and so it's because they need to balance that issue of time and treasure, and so they're going to generally take longer. Special master's programs, if you have completed all of the core coursework for the prerequisite coursework for medical school, can be really nice because they are degree granting, which means that you have access to some forms of federal financial aid, which can help you to defer the cost or to at least gain subsidized student loans to complete the program. But it's really a sort of a trying to figure out what it is that is most important to you. There's some very nice information on the AAMC's post-baccalaureate webpage.
And I would just add that in terms of post-bacs and whether you should do it a la carte, one, as Seth mentioned, it's definitely very expensive. It's also very competitive. It's not easy to get in post-bacs. They don't have a lot of seats. Our post-bac at UCSD Extension has 30 seats. That's just not a lot. So it's really competitive. As you mentioned, you wouldn't get aid because it's not a degree. But the benefits, if you did do a post-bac, are you usually an MCAT prep is embedded into the program, and I think that can be really beneficial. And then also the committee letter. You'll get a committee letter, which can be a very powerful letter to support you and your progress. That last year, whether it's your post-bac or your senior year, is going to be very important in terms of your application and showing your trajectory, and hopefully you're trending upwards grade-wise.
Thank you so much. We have a question from Ololade that states, what advice do you have for international students taking a gap year?
Work closely with the International Student Advising Office at your campus so you make sure that you get your visa and OPT and whatever it is you need to stay in the country. I am very bad at knowing these details because we have an office that does it. But I think just making sure that all of that paperwork is in order is important.
The other option, too, for our students, I would agree with that, Kate, is checking with your international student office as well as OPT and working. Also, what our students do is they might roll into a one-year master's program here, too.
One of the biggest problems, of course, is interviews. And so if you have to leave the country and return to your home country, then you may be required to come back several times to interview for medical school, which can be very cost prohibitive.
Thank you for that insight. We do have several questions about non-traditional applicants who are taking longer time, could be a decade or 2 decades, and then wanting to apply to medical school. What advice can you offer them?
I mean, certainly talk with the individual schools here and do some research on their websites to see what they expect from you as far as recent coursework and MCAT. And depending on what you're doing for work, if you're working in a scientific field, maybe there's going to be less of an expectation that you do more coursework. But I think that tends to be a place where it does pay to do some individual school-to-school research.
Okay, wonderful. We have a question from Margaret that says, when talking about gap years, a lot of people say to pursue your passions, like hiking the PCT, for example, but others say admissions counselors will look negatively at those who don't do something related to medicine during the year. How should we navigate this?
I'll take that.
I had a
Both
student
are true.
who totally did that thing.
I had a student.
Trail.
Yep, and I had a student who did the AT. And the answer is also that all medical schools are different, and there are medical school admissions folks who will look at walking the ACT or the PCT and think, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Look at the grit this student has, the dedication, the passion, and think it's a great and wonderful thing. And there are other medical school admissions people who will look at that same experience and say, why weren't they doing medicine? This is just real life.
And this is why you apply to more than one school.
Right.
But it also won't necessarily fill a gap. Like if you're thinking, well, my GPA isn't in range for these schools, but if I do this really cool other thing, that'll make up for it. That is also usually not the case. So this is a place where you want to fill the gaps and then do the thing, or do them both somehow.
Mm-hmm. I have had,
Okay,
for
that's so
example,
great.
students who have wanted to spend time skiing after college. And in order to make that possible, they work ski patrol and they work in a local free clinic as a medical assistant on the weekdays while they're skiing for the winter. So there's all kinds of ways to explore passions and fulfill passions while still keeping your hand in medicine.
Looks like we're running low on time.
Yes, actually, we're going to wrap up right now. I'd like to send a special thank you to our health professionals for your time and insight today. We wholeheartedly appreciate it, and thank you to all of our attendees. This session will be available after the fair ends in the auditorium. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.